There are moments in the wild when a man stands at the edge of his own rules, facing a choice that defines his soul. For Ethan Cole, a 50-year-old park ranger in the unforgiving heart of Yellowstone, that moment came on the icy banks of the Snake River. Ethan was a man haunted by the past, a silent witness to a failure that cost a life. Every night the dream was the same: the dark, churning water, the frantic, reaching hand of his younger brother Jack, in Ethan's own legs, frozen in fear on the shore. And on that morning, he saw the same terror mirrored in the eyes of a desperate creature, a tiny, frightened wolf pup trapped between the cold river and the crushing weight of nature's law. The river was a chaotic rush of melted snow and granite, powerful enough to tear a man to pieces. 10 yards out, on a small, slick rock, sat the pup, a little ball of gray fur, shivering violently, its soft cries barely audible above the roar of the current. On the opposite bank, the Yellowstone Alpha, a massive gray wolf known to the rangers as Old One-Eye, paced in helpless fury. This was not a rescue mission. This was a death scene. Ethan had his orders, hammered into every ranger. Do not interfere. The wolves, reintroduced to Yellowstone decades ago, were subject to natural selection. To intervene was to disrupt the balance, to risk the integrity of the Park Service itself. But the pup, no older than 3 months, was losing strength quickly. Its tiny paws were failing on the icy rock. The pup slipped once, the glacial water washing over its head, and let out a thin, pitiful squeal. The Alpha, Old One-Eye, responded with a howl, not of aggression, but of profound, raw grief that echoed off the canyon walls. That howl tore through Ethan. It wasn't a wolf. It was a father losing a child. The sight flashed Ethan back to the night his younger brother Jack was swept away. Ethan had stood paralyzed, holding a rope, but never daring to use it. The fear of the cold, swift water held him captive then. He couldn't let that happen again. He had failed his brother. He would not fail this small, helpless life. He ripped off his gloves and reached for his climbing harness. He had to cross that river. He had to try. He was redeeming a 20-year-old debt to the river itself. But the river had its own memory, and it was waiting for him. Ethan secured the rope to a giant Douglas fir. The water hit him like a physical shock, 1,000 needles of ice that stole his breath and tightened his muscles into knots. He took 2 steps, and the current slammed into his side with the force of a battering ram. He had to dig his feet in, fighting a battle against the physics of the earth. He gained 5 feet, then slipped hard. The frigid water engulfed him, and panic, the familiar, suffocating panic, clawed at his throat. He saw Jack's face in the churning water. He was failing again. He pulled himself up, gasping, shaking uncontrollably, his skin already turning blue. He realized the fatal flaw. The ice shelf was shifting. He was too exposed. He couldn't make it. He was forced to back up, defeated, shivering uncontrollably. The pup was saved for now by the small, elevated rock. But Ethan knew he couldn't reach it from here. He had survived, but he was defeated. He needed help, but who in this empty, frozen landscape would answer a park ranger who just broke every rule? Ethan stumbled onto the riverbank, soaked and broken, the image of the shivering pup burning in his mind. He was defeated by the river, and soon he would be defeated by his own boss. He needed a better way, a different way. Suddenly, a weathered, silent figure emerged from the pine trees. It was Kai, an elderly member of the Crow Nation who lived in a small, isolated cabin near the park boundary. Kai was a former Park Service consultant, highly respected for his traditional knowledge, but he had been unjustly let go years ago due to baseless racial prejudice. The Park Service, Ethan's own employer, had often treated Kai with suspicion, fearing his influence and dismissing his ancient understanding of the land. "The river is angry today, Ranger." Kai's voice was deep, calm, and slow, like the sound of wind over stone. He gestured to the frantic wolves. "The Old One-Eye, he knows you. He remembers you saved his son from a snare 2 years ago. The pack does not forget, but the river does not forgive a challenge." Ethan, desperate, pointed to the pup. "I can't reach him. The current is too strong, and the ice is breaking up fast. Kai didn't look at the pup. He looked at the riverbed. The river always has two voices. One is power, the other is a path. The path is shallowest where the water meets the stone. You must cross not from the bank, but from the old crossing, the one they don't mark on your maps. It is the path of the elk and the path of the old people. He then revealed a hidden crossing point, a shelf of submerged flat granite that only traditional ancestral knowledge could know. But Kai refused to let Ethan go alone. The pack needs to see you as one of them, not just a man with a badge. My presence will calm them, and you need another rope. They crossed together, the icy water hitting them waist high. The alpha, seeing Kai, let out a soft whine instead of a hostile growl. With Kai distracting the pack with a calming, guttural song, Ethan finally reached the rock. The pup, nearly unconscious, didn't fight. It simply collapsed into Ethan's arms. Ethan had saved the pup, Greyheart, but by accepting the help of Kai, the outsider, he had already broken a deeper, unspoken rule of the Park Service, the rule of racial exclusion, and the consequences would be swift and brutal. Ethan carried the pup, Greyheart, wrapped in his coat, back to his truck. At the small Park Service clinic, his superior, Deputy Chief Dirk Stein, a man with a history of distrusting Kai in all traditional ways, was waiting. Stein was a man of concrete rules and deep, quiet prejudice. Stein's face was stone. You intervened, Cole. You endangered yourself. And you associated with a civilian who is not authorized for river crossings, a civilian with a known history of insubordination toward park authority. The pup goes to the isolation facility in Denver, effective immediately. And you, Ranger, are suspended pending a full inquiry. The rules are clear. Stein saw the pup as a biological liability and Kai as a racial one. Two things that complicated his neat, white-collar world. Ethan was devastated. He had saved a life, but lost his job and separated the pup from its family. Ethan felt the familiar, crushing weight of systemic injustice, a new kind of drowning, this time in paperwork and prejudice. Stein thought he had won, but what he didn't know was that the ancient laws of the pack and the land were now on Ethan's side. 2 days later, the local news was a firestorm. Ethan was fighting to keep his job, and the wolf pack, alerted by Kai, was observed in an unusual state of anxiety near the clinic perimeter. Then the twist. The isolation facility transport was delayed. The pup, Greyheart, was gone from the enclosure. The official story was that the pup escaped, but Ethan knew better. Kai had intervened again, guided by the old ones, refusing to let the pup be taken by a system that couldn't understand its spirit. That afternoon, Ethan, driving a different route to avoid Stein, stopped to clear a fallen branch near the Lamar Valley crossing, the pup's family territory. He was alone. His sidearm was his only defense. Suddenly, a massive grizzly bear, the undisputed apex predator of the region, stepped out of the trees. It was a giant male, hungry and focused. The bear's eyes locked onto Ethan. This was a primal threat, far worse than the cold water. Ethan felt the paralysis creep into his muscles, the same fear that had frozen him the night Jack died. The grizzly took a menacing step forward, its massive claws scraping the dirt. Ethan raised his rifle, but his hands were shaking too violently to aim. He was reliving the paralysis, the helpless certainty of death. Then a sound that split the cold air, a fierce, warning snarl. The old one-eye alpha appeared on a ridge, flanked by the rest of his pack. They didn't run. They stood their ground, confronting the grizzly. The pack, led by the alpha and the fiercely protective scarred female, were defending the ranger who saved their pup. The scarred female led the charge. She darted forward, not to fight, but to harass, nipping at the grizzly's heels. She was sacrificing herself to buy Ethan time. Ethan snapped out of his paralysis. He wasn't helpless. He fired 2 warning shots into the air, a direct breach of protocol, but a necessary diversion. The combined aggression of the shots and the wolves was enough. The grizzly, confused and annoyed, retreated into the dense timber. Ethan was alive. The pack had saved him. But then, the real unthinkable gratitude was revealed. The scarred female approached Ethan, not hostilely, but with a weary, knowing gaze. She didn't growl. She simply nudged the thick leather belt on Ethan's side with her nose. Ethan looked down. Tucked into his belt was the pup, Greyheart, alive, safe, and looking at the wolf mother. Kai hadn't just returned the pup to the wild. He had brought the pup to the pack's territory, and the wolves, sensing the imminent danger, used the pup's immediate, trusting presence as a strategic tool to gain the confidence to defend him. They had paid their debt. They had repaid his courage with their own. But the story wasn't over. Stein and the system were still waiting for their victory. Ethan was saved by the pack. But the ultimate fight for justice, for him, for Kai, and for the soul of Yellowstone was about to begin in the cold rooms of a bureaucratic court. Ethan returned to the station, bruised but alive, the scent of pine and bear still on his coat. Stein had him cornered. The warning shots were recorded. The association with Kai was noted. The pup was officially reported as missing and unaccounted for. Stein was preparing to use this incident to not only fire Ethan, but to publicly discredit Kai and the entire concept of traditional knowledge in the park. The charges were elevated to gross misconduct and collaboration with a discredited party. Ethan felt the full weight of the establishment pushing back. He was isolated. The night before the tribunal, Ethan was alone in his cabin, drowning in regulations. He couldn't fight the rules, but Kai showed up. "You fight a wolf with courage," Kai told him. "You fight a man with truth." Stein does not hate the wolf pup. He hates the freedom the pup represents. He hates the knowledge I hold. Kai reminded Ethan of the old crossing, a place that shouldn't exist on modern maps. This sparked a thought. Ethan started digging into old park records, specifically the financial ledgers for the Lamar Valley Crossing Bridge supports from the year Kai was fired. He worked all night, fueled by coffee and sheer determination. As dawn broke, he found it, a financial anomaly. Stein's budget had mysteriously ballooned right before Kai was dismissed. The money was for emergency concrete stabilization, a cost that had doubled the actual materials used. Ethan called a friend in procurement. The friend sent him the original contract. It showed that the emergency concrete had been purchased from a shell company owned by Stein's brother-in-law, the same contractor who had blacklisted Kai, claiming Kai was incompetent for opposing the cheap, substandard concrete work. The truth was a financial and racial conspiracy. Kai wasn't fired for incompetence. He was fired for integrity. He knew the cheap materials would fail. Stein had used racial bias as cover for massive embezzlement and structural fraud. The $200,000 wasn't just missing, it was blood money, tied to the destruction of both the park's physical integrity and its cultural harmony. Ethan finally had the unassailable evidence. The ranger had the smoking gun, but the man who held the moral power to deliver the final blow was the one the system tried hardest to silence. Ethan sat in his rented suit, waiting for the hearing. Doubt gnawed at him. Stein was powerful, connected. A few documents against decades of reputation. He thought about Jack, who died because the truth was inconvenient. He thought about Kai, whose entire life was marginalized because the system was corrupt. Kai found him in the parking lot. He didn't ask about the documents. He placed a feather on Ethan's hand. "Today," Kai said, "you will not speak for the wolf. You will speak for the land. The land will tell the truth." The tribunal was held in Jackson Hole. Stein, smug and confident, laid out the charges: incompetence, insubordination, and endangerment of the public. Stein finished his testimony. Ranger Cole's actions were emotional, reckless, and driven by an inappropriate sympathy for a predator population that needs no human intervention. Then Ethan's lawyer called the final witness, Kai. Kai walked in, wearing his traditional dress, carrying nothing but his dignity. Stein immediately objected. "The witness is an unauthorized civilian with a history of Park Service disputes and is racially biased towards this issue." The judge allowed Kai to speak. Kai didn't look at Stein. He looked at the panel. The ranger saved the pup, Greyheart, but the pup was saved not by the badge, but by the heart. And the pack paid their debt not with meat, but with protection. Then the final, undeniable truth. "Chief Stein," Kai continued, his voice ringing out with a moral authority that silenced the room, "the missing money for the new Lamar Crossing Bridge supports. Where did the $200,000 go? The money was siphoned through a shell account owned by your brother-in-law, the same contractor who fired me years ago for opposing his use of cheap materials. I was called incompetent Because I refuse to violate the integrity of the land. The truth, gentlemen, is that Stein did not enforce the rules, he sold them. Ethan's lawyer presented the documents, the shell company, the inflated costs, the timeline proving Kai's firing was a cover-up. The evidence was irrefutable. Stein's face dissolved from arrogance to terror. The embezzlement, the conspiracy, and the use of racial bias to cover up massive fraud were exposed. The true wolf in the story was Stein. The tribunal was stunned. The investigation was immediately switched to Stein. Ethan was exonerated, his job secured. Kai was offered his old position back, with full honors. The unthinkable act of gratitude from the wolves had led to the final, total victory over injustice, cleaning up the human corruption that had poisoned the land. Ethan and Kai sat on a high ridge, watching the Lamar Valley. The pack was below, dynamic and thriving. Among them, a young, powerful wolf with one gray streak, Greyheart, looked up at the men. He gave a short, powerful howl, a greeting, not a threat, but a sound of kinship. Ethan was no longer haunted. The ghost of Jack was finally quieted. Ethan had redeemed his past failure by embracing courage and trusting the integrity of the land, whether it came from a wolf or an elder. They saved you, Ethan, Kai said softly, but you saved us all. You taught the Park Service that the strongest rules are not written on paper, but in the heart. Ethan looked at the thriving wolf pack and then at his friend Kai. He had found his family in the wild, bound not by blood, not by race, but by a shared act of justice that healed a land and a man. Friends, the wild places of this country hold lessons we often forget. This is a story about a debt repaid, a family restored, and the enduring truth that courage, like a wildfire, can clear the way for justice. What lesson did this story teach you about trust and the strength of the outsider? Share your thoughts below. And for more tales of resilience and hope from the heart of America, make sure you subscribe and join our pack.